shall we keep talking about our action steps? So, whether or not you were here last week, we are focusing on action steps this month. Such a highly requested topic, such a common question that I get where everyone is like, how do I come up with the action steps for my goals? What do you mean when you say monthly, weekly, daily steps? Can you give us more examples? And I have done a number of series in the past, which I will leave linked down below, of different action step examples sorted by type of goal. That is what we have done the last 2 times, is type of goal. Now we are doing the type of action step. So last week we talked all about one-time steps. You don't necessarily need to watch these in order, although last week's did have a little bit more of an overview in general to the series, but it's not necessarily building on itself because they are different things. But I do think they're all helpful. I think knowing the different types of action steps. So if you didn't catch last week's, I would definitely recommend checking that one out after you watch this one, or if you're here watching the replay, pause and go back. I don't know. I do think that they are all helpful in their own way. So this week we are doing weekly action steps, which historically has been the hardest category for me. And I think the biggest reason for that is I feel like in my mind, things are either consistent, they happen at the same time consistently, or it's like a one-off thing. And so daily habits are easier for me because they're consistent every single day. And yeah, I miss days, but I pick something based on the average day. Monthly steps are one-time steps, are one-off things, and I schedule time for them and I do them. Weekly steps for me have always been hard because my weeks have never consistently looked the same. And so it's hard for me to say, like, I'm going to do this on Tuesdays or I'm going to do this on Fridays, because my weeks don't always look like that. And so when I have weekly steps, I typically have to figure out, okay, when during the week am I going to do that thing? And like, how can I incorporate that? And that is just, it's harder for me to wrap my mind around. It doesn't mean I can't do it. It doesn't mean I don't do it sometimes. Obviously I have weekly steps. I mean, like, you've seen them before, but like, it is not always intuitive for me. And so I want to start again with a reminder. I definitely said this last week as well. You don't need all of these types of steps to be successful. You don't need monthly, weekly, and daily in order to achieve your goals. And I know some of you have come to me in the past with like, oh, this month I only have like one-time step, no weekly and all daily. Is that bad? No. There's no right or wrong number of steps in any given category. I will tell you, I do not think that you need something in every single category in order to be successful. You guys know, I've told you this before. If you fill up every single line, unless you have nothing going on that month, that's probably too much. So just that friendly reminder. But what it comes down to is what works best for you and your goals. So let's get specific. The basic definition, obviously, of a weekly one-time or a weekly step is something that only needs to happen once a week. Those are the easier ones, right? Like cleaning something. You could clean the bathrooms every day, but realistically, you put that down as a weekly step because it only has to happen once a week. And that's a great way to tackle them. These are the ones I tend to struggle with the most, though. Truth for me. For whatever reason, it is just tough. And I am working on it. I am trying to be really on top of my cleaning routine now that this is like a house that we own and I want it to like stay clean and stay nice. And it felt like I was like given this like fresh start because it was obviously professionally cleaned before we moved into it. And, but it's still tough for me to sometimes stay on top of these. So I don't always put these on my goals. These are they're not things that I always try to do. I try to incorporate them in other ways, but things that only need to happen once a week for me, I tend to like skip them a lot. But this is a very obvious option and works for a lot of people. If you're going to pick something like this, if you can, my suggestion is to try to do it at the same time every week, right? If you're going to clean something, you're going to do it, every time on Thursdays. Or if you're going to meal prep, you're going to do that on Sundays. You're going to grocery shop. Those are some other examples of things that only really need to be done once a week. Another option of a weekly step is a further breakdown of a monthly item, right? So we're going to use reading as our example here. Let's say and we talked about reading last week as an example too. So we'll start even higher level. Let's say that you have a full goal to read, my math is short-circuiting, 12 books in the quarter, right? Or about 50 books a year. So you break it down to 12 books. a quarter. Then you break that down even further and you say, I'm going to read 4 books in a month. By the way, when you're breaking down things like that, you don't always have to break them down perfectly. They don't need to be broken down like, evenly. You could break them down in whatever way works best for you, but that's a whole nother topic. So let's say you say my monthly goal, my monthly one-time step is to read 4 books a month. So then you could break that down even further and say my weekly step is to read 1 book a week. That makes sense. And maybe you hit that every single week, right? You read 1 book a week for 4 weeks and you hit your monthly goal. Or there might be a week that you miss it and you don't quite finish. You picked up a longer book that week, so you don't quite finish it. So you don't get that check mark because you didn't finish it. But then the next week you finish 2, you could still hit that monthly goal, even if you don't hit your weekly goal. But by having it in the weekly section, you're not only seeing that progress throughout the month, but you're giving yourself credit for doing it a little bit at a time instead of like procrastinating it all to the end. And this could work with so many different things and not even like obvious things like that, right? I had a goal to finish unpacking. I really don't think that's going to happen in February, but that was my goal going into February. I could have in my weekly section put unpack 5 boxes or something like that to get me a little bit closer to finishing unpacking. Actually, as I say that, maybe it would be helpful for me to go around and count how many boxes there are left to unpack and break it down in that way somehow. It's an idea. But the reminder here with this example is that it's okay to have the same goal in more than one category. In fact, spoiler alert, I'll use reading again next week in the daily section because you could have reading in your monthly section, your weekly section, and your daily section. That is allowed. You don't just have to pick one. Now, the other way a lot of people use the weekly section is if it's something that you want to do multiple times per week. And if that is the case, I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, 3 options to think about here. So the example I'm going to use is, let's say you want to work out 3 times a week. And so if you are putting that only in the weekly section, like me, I want you to put it 1 line for each time. So you'll notice, right? Instead of writing workout 3 times, I have workout, workout, workout. That is there so that if there is a week that I work out twice, I get to see 2 check marks and not none, right? I know that might seem silly. And I know for some of you who aren't motivated by check marks, you're like, that's so silly. Even if you're not motivated by check marks, I would still encourage you to do it this way because it's still information. It's still data. You're seeing like consistently how many times you did work out. And maybe you're seeing, if you put it on, let's say you have a goal, let's say you're super ambitious and you set a goal to do it 5 times because that's what you were doing at some point and you kind of got off and you put it 5 times. But then over the course of the month, you see that consistently you're checking it off 2 times, maybe 3. So then maybe next month you set the goal at 3, something a little bit more tangible. But if you had just set it written in the row, work out 5 times and you didn't check it off any times, you don't actually know how many times you worked out. Right? On my wins tracker from last month, which by the way, community, we're doing a good job this year, right? We're filling out our wins trackers. I put how many workouts I did in January. I would have never known that number if I didn't have it broken down this way. So that is option 1. Now, let's say if you are going to go ahead and put it in the daily section, knowing you won't do it every day, the weekly section can be the summary. So what I mean by that, go back to our workout example. Let's say, and this is how my sister does hers, because that's just how her goals have shaken out. And she also working out is, I don't know if I would say an easy check mark for her, but she's pretty good at hitting that one. She kind of likes to see which days of the week she actually does it consistently. So she has it in the daily section. She's not trying to work out every day. That's not realistic for like the majority of people, unless you're like really a physical athlete. And even then you probably could use a physical athlete, a professional athlete. Even then you probably need a rest day in there. So you put it in the daily section, knowing you're not going to check it off every day, but then you do check mark every time you do it. Then in the weekly section, you could have the summary, right? So again, let's say the goal is to work out 5 times a week. In the daily section, you check it off. In the weekly section, you put workout 5 times. Now, if there's a week that you work out 4 times, You're not going to get that check mark in the weekly section, but you're still going to see those 4 workouts that you did down in the daily section. Okay. That's option number 2, is you can put the number summary in the weekly if it's also going down in the daily section. Now, option number 3 is kind of the opposite. So if in the daily section, you're keeping something more reasonable, and the weekly section is there to push you a little bit more. And so I'm going to start actually with the steps example, because this is an example I've given a lot of times before, and I've totally used this for myself. Let's say that you want to hit 10,000 steps a day, which, by the way, if you've never heard me rant about this, and I learned this from a health and fitness professional, that number came from a pedometer company to try to sell pedometers. The data shows that 7,000 to 8,000 steps a day is actually what you need for your health. That is, the data has proven that is where you get the health benefits. But for number simplicity, we're going to stick with 10,000 steps. Now, getting 10,000 steps a day on your average days, let's call them, is hard. Let's say that's tough for you. Let's say you work at home and you've got kids, you're carting around to places, you're spending a lot of time in the car, being mom Uber. And so getting 10,000 steps a day on average is tough. Let's say you're like the average goal that you're working towards is 7,000 steps a day. That's your average goal. So in the daily section, you got 7,000 steps a day. But then in the weekly section, you want to push yourself to average 10,000 a day. So you put a weekly goal to hit 70,000 for the week. So that means on some of the days, you're going to have to push yourself a little bit and get more than 10, right? Your average days are 7, but then let's say on the weekends, you take really long walks around the neighborhood with your family and you're getting lots more. I don't know what the math is going to need to average out what that looks like to get an average of 10,000 steps a day or 70,000 steps a week. And that is what I am doing with veggies. So I have a goal to have 1 vegetable a day. And in January, I noticed that I was hitting that 5 times a week. That is what I was hitting. And so now my ultimate goal is still to do 1 per day. But and some of you might be laughing at me and I don't care, and some of you might be totally getting me. Like, vegetables are tough. Okay. They're just tough sometimes, and it is what it is. So, right. Ultimately the ultimate goal, like the long-term goal, is like multiple vegetables a day. Right? That would be healthy. But for now, I'm working on 1 serving of vegetables per day. But what I decided to push myself a little bit, because I hit 5 vegetables 5 days a week on average, not on average, like literally every week in January, I'm pretty sure I hit 5 days a week. So the only way to increase it in the daily section would be to go up to like 2 a day, right? And if I can't even hit 1 a day every day, like there's no way I'm going to hit 2 a day. But what I can do is add a weekly goal. So my weekly goal is to hit 7 vegetables over the course of the week. Now, that could look like hitting it every single day, or it could look like one of the days I get 2 servings and another one of the days I get 2 servings. And then I get my 7 over the course of the week. Does that make sense? So it's pushing me a little bit more than my daily step without making my daily step unattainable. And I'm using my weekly as that pushing myself a little bit more. So those are the options of things that you want to do more than once per week. And it comes down to, you may need to try a few things. You may need to tweak things and try and figure out what works best for you and your goals. And it's not going to be perfect every single time. And you're going to have to maneuver and figure out things that work best for you. But those are some options to consider. Okay, I need a sip of coffee. We're going to talk about examples again. Remember, these examples are for inspiration, not things that you have to do, not things like, these are not required. These are not like, oh, these are the only action steps I can pick for these goals. No. These are ideas to get you inspired, to get your gears turning. Okay. Just like last week, we have them broken down by different categories of goals. So we are going to start with weekly or with finance. You'll notice that for some of these, just like last week, some goals have more than others because there are only so many weekly things you can do related to your finances, right? But here are some ideas. Make coffee at home a certain number of times. I love this one because this is an example of not trying to do all or nothing, right? Maybe you are and I'm like literally thinking of somebody in my personal life who I adore dearly, but is very, very, very good at going to get coffee out. And It is not reasonable for us to be like, okay, all or nothing, you're going to just only make coffee at home. Right? What? Like that is not realistic. Instead, we're going to shrink it down, right? So maybe right now, the number of times they make coffee at home is 0. Okay. So month 1, the goal could be 1 time a week that we make them at home. And then, so whichever day makes the most sense, like maybe it's today because it's snowing outside. And then you build your way up. And again, in the spirit of not being all or nothing, we're not working towards like 100%. Maybe it's the ultimate goal is 1 per week out, right? And 6 out of the 7 days are coffee at home, but something you're working towards. Weekly budget check-in, paying the bills, stick to budget, update sinking funds, weekly finance meeting with spouse, save a certain amount of money per week. We talked about saving a certain amount of money last week as a one-time step. You could break that down into a weekly step as well, working your way up to that monthly. Reconcile accounts, eat at home a certain number of times, another way to save money, and track expenses. I will say this, I'm jumping the gun a little bit to daily. I think that if you are tracking expenses for the first time, it is more beneficial to do it on a daily basis. If you wait to do it on a weekly basis, there's going to be so many expenses that you can't keep up. Highly, highly recommend starting with it on a daily basis. And then if you work your way up, maybe it is you can do it on a weekly basis. When I was doing just my own budget and expense tracking, I did eventually get up to 2 times a week. I would do it on Mondays and Fridays. Mondays is I would track all the things from the weekend, and Fridays I would track all the things from the week. I never felt like I could do it just once a week. That never worked well for me. It just felt like way too many things. Then once, of course, it was mine and Sam's expenses, well, then I'm back to daily because I can't do it on a weekly basis. So this is an example, but I just want to add that to my 2 cents there on tracking expenses as a weekly step. All right, next category is home. Here are some weekly action ideas for home. Clear out expired food, clean a specific area, declutter 1 room, weekly cleaning routine, prep the house to sell, get 1 box of stuff out, Sunday reset, clean the bathrooms, 2 hours of decluttering, 60 minutes on 1 room, and put the laundry away. Another thing I will comment here that is on the notes for the daily, I'm pretty sure, but it actually applies to the weekly too. Some of these steps are temporary, right? Something like decluttering 1 room. In theory, this is temporary, right? You're decluttering 1 room until you feel like you're in a good place. Some of these are probably more habits, things that you want to instill that you are going to continue and not stop, like a Sunday reset. It may change what it looks like and what time of day it's at, but you probably intend to keep that for some extended period of time. All that to say, you don't approach them any differently, but it's just something to think about. Okay, next category is health. So work out a certain number of times per week. We obviously did that one extensively in the examples. A weekly meal plan, a weekly step goal, which does not have to be your daily goal times 7. You know what? It could even be less if you wanted it to be, but most of the time with weekly or with steps, I would always try to push. I would either keep it the same, right? If you have a daily step goal of 5,000, I would have your weekly step at 35, and you could totally just keep it the same, or you could push yourself a little bit, and it doesn't have to be much. Cook 1 new recipe, a certain number of workout minutes, eat out a certain number of, is what that should say, a certain number of times, prep breakfast, prep lunches, schedule workouts, weigh in, go to PT. I love it. And then the last category is personal, which just encompasses everything that anybody sent in. These are your examples, regardless of what kind of goal it was. So apply to a certain number of jobs, create for 15 minutes, have a family meeting, attend a class, practice weekly, work on coursework, write for a certain number of minutes, watch the Goals with Laken call. I love that one. Plan for the week, quality time with family, bubble bath, and read 1 book. Again, just examples, just ideas to get your peers.